Gerald was 55 when his wife of 29 years told him who she'd actually been married to. Not him, what he produced. They were standing in the kitchen of a house he'd paid off over 26 years of monthly transfers. Automatic, same day each month, never late, never mentioned. She'd picked out the granite countertops. She'd ordered the pendant lights from a catalog in 2014 because the old ones made the room feel clinical. He'd replaced the refrigerator twice. It hummed behind them now, doing what it always did, working steadily, without acknowledgement, in the background. There were 2 suitcases in the hallway, a matched set. He didn't own a matched set of anything. He owned things that worked. Gerald, I can't do this anymore. Do what? This. Watch you sit at that desk until midnight trying to hold together something that's already gone. The contracts aren't coming back. You said so yourself. I said revenue was down. I didn't say 70%, Gerald. That's not down. That's over. There was a pause, the kind that fills a kitchen the way cold fills a house when someone turns off the heat. I took the position at Reinhardt. I told you that. It's less, but it's stable. We adjust. You mean I adjust. You mean I give up the life we built because you lost the thing that paid for it. The life we built. Don't do that. Don't make this about language. Diane, you haven't worked since 2006. Her voice hardened, not into shouting, into something worse, into certainty. I managed this household. I made your life possible. I know. I'm not saying I didn't sign up for this version of you. I signed up for the version that could provide, and I'm not going to stand here and watch you figure out who you are without that. The refrigerator hummed. 29 years. And I'm grateful for them. That was it. That was the whole thing. 29 years of 60-hour weeks, 2 herniated discs, a house paid in full, a daughter raised and launched, a life constructed beam by beam, and the summary was a woman standing in a kitchen she'd decorated, holding the handle of a suitcase she'd already packed, delivering a termination notice the way someone reads the terms of a cancellation. Gerald didn't have the words yet. Not the real ones. Not the ones that would come later, months later, in the quiet of a different kitchen in a different life. He said 29 years because it was the only thing he could reach for, and he knew even as he said it that it was inadequate. A number. Just a number, and she had already decided that numbers only mattered when they had dollar signs in front of them. She was gone by Thursday. The movers came on Saturday, a crew of 3 young men who carried out the furniture she'd designated as hers, on a list Gerald found later, typed, printed, and left on the kitchen counter next to a pen in case he wanted to contest anything. He didn't. The house became very large very quickly. He'd never noticed the echo before. 29 years of someone else's noise, the television she kept on in the background, the phone calls with her sister, the particular way cabinet doors sound when someone who is disappointed with you closes them slightly harder than necessary, had filled the square footage so completely that he'd mistaken it for his own life. Now the square footage was empty, and the silence was specific, not peaceful. Specific, the silence of a building that had been evacuated. Gerald kept going to work. Not because the work needed him. The Reinhardt position was 40 hours, manageable, almost gentle compared to the decades he'd spent at his own firm, but because stopping felt like agreeing with her. If he stopped, then she was right. He was the job. Remove the job, remove the man. So he went. He sat at a desk that wasn't his, in a building he didn't own, solving problems for structures he would never enter. And each evening he drove back to the house, her pendant lights still hanging, her granite countertops still cool under his palm when he set his keys down. And he microwaved something and sat in the living room where the couch used to be, in a folding chair he'd bought from a hardware store, and ate dinner looking at the wall where the television had been. January, February, March. His daughter called once a week. She was careful. She said things like, "How are you holding up?" and "Are you eating?" The questions people ask when they've already decided you're not okay and want credit for checking. He told her he was fine. He was not fine. But the word was load-bearing. Remove it, and the whole conversation collapses into something neither of them wanted. He didn't tell anyone what Diane had said. Not the exact words. He carried them the way you carry an injury you're afraid to get diagnosed. If you don't name it, maybe the bone isn't actually broken. Maybe it's just bruised. Maybe it heals on its own. I didn't sign up for this version of you. He heard it in the kitchen. He heard it at the desk at Reinhardt. He heard it at 2 a.m. in the folding chair, staring at the wall, his hand resting on the arm like he was waiting for a meeting to begin that no one had scheduled. Something inside him, something load-bearing, something that had held up the architecture of who he believed himself to be for 3 decades, hadn't broken. It had been removed, carefully, deliberately, by the one person he'd built the entire structure to house. The change didn't start with a decision. It started with an accident. Gerald was reorganizing the garage, one of the rooms Diane hadn't claimed, when he found the banker's box. 30 years of tax returns, joint filings, every year side by side on the same form. His income, itemized. Her income, blank. Year after year, 1995, 1996, 1997, all the way to 2203. His entire adult life reduced to a financial instrument, 2 people signed, and 1 person funded. He sat on the garage floor with the box between his legs and looked at the numbers, and for the first time he didn't see sacrifice. He saw a transaction that had never been negotiated. He saw 30 years of 60-hour weeks, the Sunday nights at the office, the holidays interrupted by client calls, the 2 herniated discs he'd earned from stress, and a desk chair he never replaced because replacing things for himself always seemed to come last. And he saw, with the clarity of a man reading a blueprint after the building has already been condemned, that the structure had never been what he thought it was. It wasn't a marriage, it was a service agreement, and the service agreement had a termination clause he'd never read. When the service declines, the client leaves. He didn't get angry. That surprised him. Anger requires the belief that something was taken from you. What Gerald felt was closer to recognition, the slow, nauseating understanding that the thing he'd been protecting had never existed in the form he imagined. He closed the banker's box. He put it back on the shelf. And then he did something he hadn't done in 30 years. He left work at 5 o'clock. It was a Tuesday night, 3 months after the banker's box, when Gerald called Tom. They'd been friends since Michigan State. Tom had been divorced since 2011, longer than Gerald had been aware that divorce was something that could happen to him. Before it happened, did you know what it actually was? Know what? That it was conditional, the whole thing. That it was always conditional. Gerald, I'm going to say something, and you're going to hate it. Say it. You knew too. You just couldn't afford to admit it because you were too busy paying for it. There was a silence on the line. The kind that sits between 2 men who have known each other long enough that silence counts as agreement. Yeah. Welcome to the other side, brother. Gerald sold the house. Not dramatically. Not as a statement. He sold it because a 4-bedroom home for 1 man with a folding chair and a microwave was an engineering problem with an obvious solution. Reduce the load to match the structure. He moved into a 2-bedroom rental 7 miles away. The kitchen table seated 2, but only held 1 coffee mug in the mornings. The building's old boiler kicked in at 6 in the morning with a sound like a large animal clearing its throat. And Gerald, who had spent 30 years being woken by anxiety, found that he didn't mind being woken by machinery instead. Machinery was honest. It made noise because it was working, not because it wanted something. He kept the position at Reinhardt. He stopped working at 6. He read not self-help books, not recovery memoirs, but structural engineering journals he'd been too busy to open for 15 years. He remembered that he loved the work, not the income the work produced, the work itself. The elegant problem of making something stand up against gravity and time and weather. He cooked. Badly at first, then less badly. He bought a real chair. What was building inside Gerald wasn't confidence. Confidence is a performance. This was something structural. This was a man discovering that his value had never been the number on the tax return. It was the mind that generated the number. And that mind, quiet now, unburdened, solving problems for the pleasure of solving them, was still there, had always been there, buried under 60-hour weeks and someone else's expectations. And then, on a Tuesday evening 22 months later, in a mid-range Italian restaurant with checked tablecloths and bread baskets, Diane walked back in. Gerald saw her before she saw him. She came through the door the way she used to enter rooms, scanning first, calibrating, locating the most relevant person, and then adjusting her trajectory. She had always been good at that, reading a room like a floor plan, identifying the load-bearing wall. She was thinner, her hair was different, shorter, the kind of cut that signals a new chapter to the people around you while confirming to yourself that the old chapter ended on your terms. She wore a coat he didn't recognize. She carried the posture of someone who had prepared a speech and was now looking for the podium. She found it. Table 9. A man eating pasta alone on a Tuesday, wearing a scratched Casio watch and reading a journal about soil load tolerances. She sat down without being invited. Gerald. He looked up, set the journal down. No visible reaction. Diane. You look good. You look rested. I've been thinking about you a lot, actually. About us. Okay. What would you like me to say? I'd like you to say you've thought about me too. I've thought about you. And I'm having the rigatoni. It's good here. Gerald, we were married for 29 years. You don't just set that aside. I didn't set it aside. You did. On a Thursday. The movers came Saturday. I was scared. The money, the business, everything was falling apart, and you were just sitting there at that desk, like if you worked hard enough the problem would solve itself. That's how I've solved every problem for 30 years. I needed you to talk to me. You needed me to make you feel secure. When I couldn't do that with money, talking wasn't going to be enough. We both know that. I was there, Gerald. Every year, every holiday, every late night waiting for you to come home. He set his fork down, looked at her directly. I didn't lose a wife. I lost a client. That's a horrible thing to say. It's a precise thing to say. I've changed. I've had time to think. About what I took for granted. About what I threw away. What did you throw away, Diane? Be specific. You. Us. The life we had. Which part of the life? The mornings I left before you woke up? The Sundays at the office? The 2 herniated discs? Or the pendant lights and the granite countertops? All of it. I miss all of it. You didn't stay through the hard part. You stayed through the profitable part. Those are different marriages. That's not fair. I know it isn't. None of it was. So, that's it? Almost 30 years and you sit there eating pasta and tell me I was just a transaction? I didn't say you were a transaction. I said the marriage was. I loved you inside of it, but the structure itself, the terms, the roles, who owed what to whom, that was never love. That was logistics. I was loyal to you. Loyalty isn't a subscription service you cancel when the content changes. The door opened behind Diane and a woman Gerald hadn't seen in 4 years walked in with the energy of someone who'd been circling the block waiting for a signal. Ruth, Diane's older sister, the one who had opinions about everything and expertise in nothing. Gerald, Diane told me she was coming to talk to you. I'm just here for support. Support? You know Richard left her nothing and she's been… Ruth, stop. No, he should know. He should know what you've been going through. Maybe if he understood what it's been like. Gerald looked at Diane quietly. She just told me the reason you're here. I told you to wait in the car. Gerald looked at Ruth evenly. Ruth, Diane didn't come here because she misses me. She came here because she needs what I used to provide. You just confirmed that. Thank you. Ruth opened her mouth, closed it, sat down. That's not why I'm here. 30 years of 60-hour weeks and you packed a suitcase in 40 minutes. That's your answer. That was always your answer. Not the silence of someone preparing a counter-argument. The silence of a woman who had arrived with a blueprint for a conversation that no longer existed. Every entrance she'd planned, the warmth, the history, the claim of change, even the sister's appeal to pity, had been methodically disassembled, and what was left was the raw frame of the thing she had never wanted Gerald to see clearly. Gerald set his napkin on the table, not aggressively, the way you set down a tool when the work is finished. And then he said the thing he'd understood since the banker's box on the garage floor. The thing he'd carried for 22 months, turning it over in his mind like a structural problem he couldn't solve because the answer was too simple and too devastating to accept. Diane, I need you to hear this. Not because it will change anything, because I need to have said it. Say it. You didn't leave when things got hard. Things were hard for 30 years. The 60-hour weeks were hard. The missed dinners were hard. The 2 herniated discs and the Sunday nights at the office. And the years, Diane, where I came home and you were already asleep and I stood in the hallway with my shoes in my hands so I wouldn't wake you. That was hard. You stayed for all of that. You didn't leave when things got hard. You left when things stopped being profitable. That's not abandonment. That's a balance sheet decision. You're not here because you miss me. You're here because the market corrected and your portfolio was one man. I loved you. I believe you. I believe you loved the version of me that worked himself into 2 surgeries and never complained. I believe you loved the version that paid off the house and replaced the refrigerator and didn't ask why you never offered to split a single bill in 29 years. I was the infrastructure, you were the tenant, and tenants don't get to renegotiate the lease after they've already vacated. Diane said nothing. Ruth stood up and grabbed her purse. We should go. Gerald didn't look at Ruth. He was still looking at Diane. She's right. You should. The restaurant continued around them. A waiter refilled a water glass 2 tables away. Someone laughed near the bar. The breadbasket sat between them, untouched the way breadbaskets sit in conversations where no one is hungry. Gerald watched Diane's face the way he used to read blueprints, looking for the point of failure, the joint where the stress exceeded the tolerance. He found it. It was in her eyes. Not the tears, the recognition behind the tears. The slow, sickening arrival at a truth she had spent 22 months outrunning. He wasn't angry. He wasn't broken. He wasn't waiting. He was done. And done, real, structural, load-tested done, was the one condition she had never prepared for. Diane stood. She gathered her coat, the new coat, the one from the new chapter. Her hands were shaking. Is there anything at all I could say? I built everything twice, once for the family, once to survive the family leaving. I'm not building a third time for your convenience. Gerald stood. He took cash from his wallet, enough to cover his meal and hers, because that's who he is, and the gesture is the final proof that his generosity was never the problem, and placed it on the table. He put on his jacket. The Casio watch caught the light as his wrist passed the candle on the table. He looked at her one final time. I forgive you, Diane, but I will never rehire you for a position you already quit. He walked out. She didn't follow. Ruth didn't speak. What Gerald did in that restaurant, the thing that will be read by some as coldness, by others as cruelty, by a few as a man incapable of forgiveness, was none of those things. It was the first act of genuine, structural self-respect he had performed in 57 years. Not the kind you read about in a book, not the kind you post about on the internet, the kind you earn by waking up in a 2-bedroom apartment with a boiler that sounds like a large animal, making 1 cup of coffee, sitting in a chair you bought yourself, and understanding, finally, irreversibly, that your value was never the number on the tax return. It was never the house. It was never the 60-hour weeks. It was never your utility to someone who measured love and outputs. Your value was the man who remained when all of that was stripped away. And that man, quiet, unhurried, eating rigatoni on a Tuesday, reading about soil load tolerances, was always there. He'd just been buried under 30 years of someone else's invoices. Gerald walked to his car. The night air was cool. His watch, the scratched Casio, the one he'd bought with his very first paycheck, the band replaced 4 times, the face unreadable in direct light, was still on his wrist. It had outlasted everything, every contract, every client, every tenant. It kept time because that's what it was built to do. A man who stops measuring his life by what he provides to people who only stayed for the provision isn't broken. He's finally building to code.